You guys are really going to enjoy this class. You're going to learn a lot about branding. And I don't know how much you know about branding right now, but when Howard gets done, you're going to know what you need to know to go forward.
We're actually affected by branding way more than one thing. So even though a lot of people have heard about branding, it only started becoming popular as far as a term about 3 years ago. I would say 3 to 5 years ago. But very few people actually understand what is branding. And believe it or not, we cannot survive without brands. They actually influence our identities, they influence our culture, they influence literally our aspirations of who we'd like to become and our lifestyles. So I don't know if when you're a little kid, but I remember back in grade school, it was like a really big deal if you were wearing Adidas shoes. And it was all about fitting in. Did you have the 3 stripes on your side of your shoes? Or what kind of clothing did you wear as far as like, was it polo, Ralph Lauren, or was it, surfing clothing like OP or Hang Ten? Remember Hang Ten? So it was all about culture, and it really shaped us through our growing up. And it shaped us very critically during our teenage years. Remember? It was all about fitting in. Well, believe it or not, it hasn't changed for any of us as adults. It's all still about fitting in. So I'm going to be talking about a lot about how this actually impacts your brand, and really defining if you even have a brand, and then what is a master brand and what is a super brand. A master brand is a compelling emotional charge identity to a product or service which assists the consumer to make a positive purchase. In other words, it's really like going through the grocery store and you can recognize, let's say, General Mills or whatever it may be, that you recognize a brand that you feel comfortable enough that you actually make a purchase, okay? So that is kind of like a reflection of how powerful brands are when we're walking down an aisle. One of the main reasons why that's important as well nowadays is because we're actually living in an age where we're information rich and time poor. So we need brands to support us to make sure that we're utilizing our time efficiently when it comes to mundane things as well as luxury or lifestyle goods. Nike came out in the 70s, remember that? It wasn't until the CEO realized the strength behind branding, it took him 20 years to figure it out, okay? And he was really stubborn. And he actually, there's a whole interview on this, it's really interesting. And when he realized the power behind branding, when it came to brand awareness, that's when the advertising campaigns came in from the standpoint like Michael Jordan, which is really about aspiration. It becomes much more than the product itself. You get that? What Apple's all about is simplicity. They're really designed everything from what's called minimalist, which is during the Bauhaus movement. Everything was based on a minimalist. Why? Because it has the longest shelf life when it comes to aesthetics. It's broken down into basic shape, okay? And if you look at all their products, it's designed that way, and there's actually a uniform look between all the different computers, all the different hardware configuration interfaces. There's a reason and intent behind that. Is so you could actually cover up their identity. In fact, they have their identity on the back, but you could actually identify it's made by Apple. That's how powerful it is. The product itself becomes a brand. Branding is not advertising, branding is not graphic design, branding is not PR, marketing, printing. Now this is where the confusion comes into place, but at the same time, a lot of clarity starts to happen. Is that, let's say that everybody here represented, let's say marketing over there, PR over there, branding is this entire room. It looks at things from the totality. So you can see how complex it can get. But the point being as well is that now things can work together as a whole. When I work with companies, most of the times I work with companies to reposition themselves for better market share. And the first thing I find out is that there's no one directing the organization at large, because it's such a specialty to understand how marketing is related to sales, sales related to operations, so forth and so on, okay? So a lot of times companies actually reach a lid and they can't grow anymore, but they don't even know their blind spots. So then what we have to do is called a brand audit, and that's really breaking down everything and getting down to their core essence is what do they stand for, how they make a difference, and why people should care. Also from a standpoint, it means that it's really creating culture as well. Like REI is Recreation Equipment Incorporated, and it has to do with outdoor equipment. And they actually have such a strong culture that they have a line of people that want to work there, literally. They have a waiting list for employees to work there because the culture And what the culture is about is that the only way you could work there is if you're expert in, let's say, rock climbing, mountain biking, kayaking, that the people that work there are so enthusiastic, that's what makes people drawn to even come into the store and get actually expert help, you see? So it's really defining the culture as well. Branding, that's what branding is about on the inside. And that impacts to the consumer. See how everything is interconnected as spokes? Okay? That's what happens when you start to brand things appropriately and integrate things together. That's how you're going to start dominating market share. And then even beyond market share, the way I define branding is really what's called mind share. Because market share, in my opinion, is kind of dated. It has to do with more like demographics. Because of the technology and sociology and with the social networking and blogging and today's millennials, if you weren't in Scott DeGraffe's class, it's a younger generation that really how they adjust to a product is not they don't want to be sold through advertisement like the baby boomers, like a lot of us in here. The point being is that it has to do with referrals. People are telling other people what they buy through friends, through social networking. You get the power in that? Most companies don't even understand it. They don't touch that power, but that's the second buying power in the world. Okay? So there's an understanding that needs to happen with that integrated into the brand. That's how you start to dominate market share, is you got to get in the mind of the consumer. So when I always look at companies, they've always looked from the inside out, but they really never look from the outside in, kind of from the consumer's mind. If you don't have a consumer, you have no business. That's the bottom line. You have no profit, you have no culture, you have nothing. So that's why there's dollars that's spent to create what's called brand awareness through media, through channels, through distribution, to capture that mind share. The question is, what are you going to say? Advertising really has one job, okay, if it's done right, and that is to defend the position of the brand. That's all it's designed to do. If you look at the best advertising, they don't even show a lot of times a product. They are really about the lifestyle. They're defending the lifestyle that's an aspiration for the consumer to have. Why? Because as a human being, we desire. We don't purchase until we actually feel it. We are very intellectual. I'm not dismissing that. But ultimately, we purchase based on how does it actually then improve my lifestyle or change the way I do something. And I'm talking about the most analytical male. It doesn't matter ultimately on a subconscious level is how is this going to make me feel. People go, oh, I'm too small for a branding company. Okay, that's not true. Every company starts small. And the ones that accelerate the fastest, like Starbucks, for example, or REI, is when they understand what branding is. Because when you understand what branding is about, you could actually accelerate your company 100 to 200 times or even more faster to the market. Okay? And utilize your resources so you're not misusing your resources. Does that make sense? By the way, everyone is branding regardless if they're aware of it or not. Branding is really, a brand is what sticks in the consumer mind of what they think about your product, service, or company. That's what branding is about. It's what I think about your company, product, or service on a conscious or subconscious level. Okay? You get that? The power is in the consumer's hand. That is what a brand's about, okay? It's not about the product, it's not about the service, it's not about anything other than what do they think about your company, product, or service, and how is this going to be an aspiration for my lifestyle. Branding, by the way, is about building the brand. It's about execution, implementation. Execution and implementation are the same thing. It's about building a brand. Now, that's 90% of the work, by the way. That's the tough part. How are you going to get noticed amongst the clutter? There's more product than ever out there. Think about it. In the past, you know, when cars were being built, you had a Model T, basically one color, one model, right? Look at all the manufacturers of cars now. The question is, that's just automobile. You take any product, you take cereal, take anything, shoes, clothing, whatever it may be. It's crowded out there, okay? So you got to think way beyond your product or service. If you don't, you won't, I'm not kidding you, you won't survive out there. It's really tough out there right now because there's so many aesthetics are playing a huge role. I mean, look at Apple Computer. They pay so much attention to R&D, to product designing. Look at cars. I mean, I love cars. It's so cool what's going on with automobiles. And it has to do, too, with technology. Technology, science, politics, economics, socialists, humanity, they all go hand in hand. There's what's called a selling proposition, which for me is like old school. I'm talking old school. It's like 5 years ago, really. And people are using it constantly today. It's not a good or bad thing. I'm just saying in today's, here again, economy doesn't work to be really successful. You got to look from the standpoint of a buying proposition, looking from the consumer's perspective, what's the value for me? Most companies look from the standpoint, what's the value from the standpoint of me, the company, right? But you got to flip it around. You got to look from the standpoint, what's the value from the consumer's perspective? That's how you're actually going to get something sold and capture mind share. I define brand visions. A vision is really, what does an organization, a culture want to become? What legacy does it want to leave behind? How does it want to impact humanity? You see how that's a much bigger context? And then a brand philosophy, okay, is what values are you going to create within the company itself that all the different shareholders can align to? Like, what are those values? Is it going to be based on integrity? Is it going to be doing things on time? What are those values? So the way I put it is there's a vision and then there's the philosophy. That sets up the sphere for the context for everything else to grow in and be created in. Okay? So that means the sales, that means the products, that means everything fits in here. Now between those 2 points becomes your mission. Okay? But now you're very clear where you're heading towards. Most companies, they don't have a vision. What happens is they basically will run sideways. Okay? And they keep hiring and firing and hiring and firing. No one understands who they are. If they don't understand who they are, do you think the customer will? and then you got the philosophy that they don't have the value. So they start hiring or taking on, investors that really don't share the same mind. Okay? Do you think that's going to have an impact? That's why iPod really took off, because it was no longer about CD. It was really about customization, to customizing to your own songs and your own liking. You get that? So what's happening now, and that's why Mini Cooper became really popular, is because it was like the first car you could buy online that you could custom make. Now if you look at some of the other cars, a lot like Cayenne, they're hitting that market as well. A lot of automobile companies are really moved towards that, and they know if they don't move to customization towards the end user, they will lose market share. Customization is so important right now, it's crazy. Okay? In fact, if you don't think about customization, you're not thinking and keeping in sync with the millennials. The millennials are the ones that want customization because so much of their way of thinking is about individuality. So now you move into psychograph, it's about psychology behind individuals, and you talk about different generation gaps. Okay, so the baby boomers are about industrial revolution, which is all about manufacturing. With the millennials, it's all about me. It's all about what's in it for me, what's going to make it a better lifestyle. It's almost a sense of entitlement. When I interview my nephews and nieces, they're so straight, they go, yeah, we're entitled. We're about the entitlement. We're selfish. It's so funny. And they admit it. Aaron, my wife, so yeah, you got the Y generation, you got the Z, the X generation, you got the Z generation. The Y generation actually thinks differently. It's about the we generation. You got to think about brand extension, extending out. Because when a product rolls out, what the consumers can expect is what's next. And you have to think about a year in advance about what's next. Levi's, here's emotional impact. They're the first ones to do the rivets on the jeans, right? You know why the Russians were buying Levi's back in the 80s and 90s? Specifically, let's see here, in the mid-90s, early 90s. Because they want to buy a piece of America. Do you get that? It's much bigger than the product. You got to look way beyond the product. Thank you for being here.